Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we discuss the top 20 tight end rankings for 2023. A lot of 20s in there. I'm sorry, I got a little tongue-tied. But we're going to be breaking down some key things you need to know for the tight end position. How high overall do you draft Travis Kelce? What rounds do you draft guys like Mark Andrews and TJ Hockenson? And is there a couple late-round sleepers that are not even close to the top 150 you need to know about? All that and more on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, starting right now. And that's right, folks. Once again, we have Ben Wasley who's on the show because to finish it off, we had you for quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs. Now we got you for tight ends to discuss the top 20. You can follow him on Twitter at Fantasy First Down. No O. What's going on, Ben?
Oh, look, happy to be here. It's really it's cold Saturday morning where I am, nice and rugged up. Got my Mahomes jersey on to talk about some Travis Kelce. Ready to go.
I like that. Sporting that right now. That's good. And honestly, I'll tell you this. It's surprisingly, top 20, 2023 is a little bit of a tongue twister. So I hope you do better than I did to start the show. So, all right, on today's show, we're going to be breaking down the top 20 tight ends. And before we get into this, I kind of like to get your thoughts first about the position overall, how you're kind of viewing it during draft season, and kind of like maybe some insight about how your rankings shake out. Any surprises?
Yeah, the thing that's really interesting for me about tight ends is that I'm basically very close to ADP in most areas and pretty close to consensus as well. There's a lot less variability in the industry in general around tight ends, which does not mean that things are going to shake out exactly as we expect. We've seen that happen in the past with certain positions and it ends up being totally different to what we expect. But for the most part, I think you're going to find in draft, the order's pretty locked in, especially around the top 4, 5 and 6 switch around a bit, and then from 7 onwards, it's a bit different. For the most part, you know where the players are expected to go, and you can basically expect to get your guy when you should get him.
Yep. So that's why kind of today the focus is less about the positional rank. It's more about when and where to draft these guys, because unlike the running backs and the wide receivers where you're drafting them almost back to back, these guys are going multiple rounds different. So there's different philosophies. We talked about it last time. We talked about the top 10 guys. You know, Kelce, yes, Kelce's the one, but he's going in the first round. So is he a value at 5? Let's talk about it right now. And let's get into it because he's the GOAT tier, my friend. And this is the one person, as you see the lonely name scrolling across the bottom, it's Travis Kelce. And we know he's the first tight end off the board. But, like, quickly, what's your thoughts about Kelce in the first round? Where are you drafting him overall right now?
So I think one thing we overlook a lot when we do fantasy analysis in general is the setup of our league and what the league requires you to draft, what the league requires you to start. A lot of the time we tend to think of leagues as having 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 flex. And that's kind of like the basic setup. And a lot of the time we kind of factor things around that. But your league at home could be different. You might have a 3rd wide receiver, and a lot of my leagues do these days. You might have a 2nd flex spot, and that makes a massive difference. So I did a lot of analysis, and when I do my analysis, I generally compare where a player, how much value a player has to the next guy that you could get off waivers, or alternatively to the next guy you could get off your bench. So there's a lot of names for that, and we can get into that another time. But basically, when you do that comparison, for the most part, in a league where you only have 2 wide receivers and you only have 1 flex spot, Kelce's value is around the 3rd overall pick, which seems insane. But he really only falls out behind, well, it depends who your first wide receiver is. For me, it's Jefferson. I know for you it's Cup, but we talked about that last week. So behind that first wide receiver and behind McCaffrey, that's where Kelce should go. Now, if you add in a 3rd wide receiver, all of a sudden your wide receivers get more valuable, and you should be taking Kelce maybe behind 2 or 3 wide receivers, depending on the settings. If you add in an extra flex spot, then all of a sudden your running backs get more valuable, and you should be taking Kelce around, 5th, 6th, 7th overall. So for me, it depends on your league, but he should definitely be going in those first 3 to 7 picks.
This is really creepy because today, and I'm not making this up, in my top 150, I literally put a sentence in there breaking down what my top 150 means for starting lineups. So 2 running back, 3 receiver. And I literally wrote a line, if your league is a different format, basically starting 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, then this changes. Like literally today, So
Yeah.
I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what if you're like on a camera set up in my house, but that is super creepy because I literally just said that today in my article. It's so true. It's so true. And I got caught up in that for a long time. In my home league, very good case is that we moved to 3 wide receivers 2 years ago, and I was still valuing running backs like I viewed them 3 years ago when we only had 2 wide receiver starters. And I realized, like, it took me a year and a half too late to realize it, but I'm like, this is stupid. Like, you have to bump up wide receivers, but better late than never, folks. Yeah. Quickly about Travis Kelce, because a lot of people are going to talk about the age. And the best part, too, is if you go to razzball.com, I literally did an age analysis for every position 2 years ago. Like, and it's got all the information you need. And here's a really quick snippet from it, all right? There's been 4 tight ends that in recent history that have played pretty well into their mid to late 30s. Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez, Jason Witten, and Ben Watson come to mind. Ben Watson's a surprising one, but I wanted to take a look at their age 33 season, which is what Kelce just had, and the 3 following seasons after that, okay? And here's what I found out. So of those 4 tight ends who's continued to play well to their mid to late 30s, they averaged 153 fantasy points, 9.6 PPR points per game in their age 33 season on average, okay? After that, the next 3 years, they averaged 163 points and 10.6 PPR points per game. So it makes no sense, right? But here's why. Tony Gonzalez, by the way, literally identical, 12.9 and then 12.8 the next 3 years. Antonio Gates, his points per game went up, but his total went down slightly because he wasn't as healthy. Jason Witten saw about a point, just over a point less. Ben Watson had career years into his 30s. So this age 34, 35, I don't care. It's different for tight ends than it is any other position. And Kelce is such a difference maker that I still have him. Actually, am behind you. I actually have him at 9th overall. I'm taking Derrick Henry over him and Stephon Diggs right now. But if we start hearing camp buzz that Tony and Sky Moore aren't really as good as we thought with when the pads are on, then Kelce's just going to be another target hog, and I probably will bump him up back to 6-7 range. So I hear you on that. Let's jump down to the second tier, which is your high volume receivers tier. And just like you brought up a little bit earlier, you kind of have them in order with ADP. Mark Andrews at 2, Hockenson at 3, and George Kittle at 4. And so is there anything really notable here that you feel like you need to call out for this group? Is there someone that, like, what rounds are you targeting these guys specifically in?
Again, I think it does make a real difference on your league settings. But one thing I've noticed here is that for the most part, the tight end 2, 3, and 4 in final points over the course of the year tend to be a lot closer than we realize. We tend to think that our tight end 2's up here, and then, so I know this is not very good audio-wise, but your tight end 2's up the top. Then your wide receiver
his hand's over his eyebrow.
My hand is going down the screen right now, people. The tight end 2's up the top. Then the tight end 3's got a gap, and then there's a gap to the tight end 4. There's a gap to the tight end 5. Doesn't really work like that. With tight ends for years, for the most part, the top tight end is Kelce. He's way above everyone else. And then 2, 3, and 4 are pretty close, and 5 and 6 aren't that far away, et cetera, et cetera. For me this year, that's not really reflected in the ADP. I know Razzball's got Mark Andrews going at 32 overall, so we're talking late 3rd round. And I think that's about right, depending on your league settings. If you've got 3 wide receivers, that's where I'd have him as well. But then you have to wait a lot before Hockenson starts going off. He's like late 4th round, and then you've got Kittle going off in the late 5th round. I reckon they should all be a little bit closer. So that means even though I think Andrews is going about in the right place, because the other guys are going later, I'm probably waiting and taking Kittle.
I might be opposite than you on this one. I am actually all in on Mark Andrews this year. The year that he had his big season 2 years ago, ironically, was the same year that they let Lamar Jackson loose with pass volume. Now, that season was cut short by injury for Lamar, but if you look at his first 12 games, he actually had more pass attempts than the year prior, just in 12 games. They tried to throw a little bit more, and Mark Andrews was the main guy. And I as much as I want to pretend like I love, Odell Beckham and Zay Flowers and Bateman, I do like them as a trio, but there's a lot of question marks. Bateman's dealing with – he just got an injection in his foot. He's coming off a Liz Frank injury. Zay Flowers is a 5'10", 175-pound rookie, which in the success there is kind of meh. And then Beckham has been basically in and out for the last 2 to 3 years. So I think Mark Andrews is going to be a complete target hog. If the pass volume goes up like Todd Monken wants, I think that you're looking at 140 targets for Andrews with his efficiency, and Lamar Jackson's, a great thrower in the middle of the field. I think you're talking he's going to be a difference maker, which is why I have him in the second round. And my hot take for the fantasy football for tight ends is probably I have Goedert over Kittle.
And that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and the reason why is because when you look at Kittle's numbers last year with Brock Purdy, with Deebo Samuel, and CMC and Ayuk, when all four of them played together, his numbers dropped significantly. So it's only a 5-game sample. It's not a big sample. And, of course, it could change this year. But Brock Purdy, by the way, is dealing with an injury, and he's not practicing at all. So all the momentum he got last year, he might have gotten more reps last year than he got this year because he can't throw right now. So I just think that when you look at isolate those games, the 5 games, he drops to 10 PPR points per game. Still solid, but he's not a difference maker anymore. And Goddard's closer to 12 points last year with Jalen Hurts. And by the way, I just think Hurts is going to get better. I might be a little bit higher than Goddard than most. I actually took him in the 4th round of a startup 1 QB dynasty league recently because when I look at the tight end landscape, what guy other than Kelce's going to be aged out in 3 years? Then you look at, TJ Hockenson. They're talking about letting Kirk Cousins walk next year in free agency. So then what's the quarterback situation for the Vikings? Mark Andrews, I like a lot. He's probably my number 2. But then after that, Kittle, there's just always too many mouths to feed. You're banking on an injury, which usually happens. Deebo.
I was about to say, how often do they all actually? There's a reason they only played 5 games together last year.
So I do think that it is baked in a little bit into my projection. I actually added a 1.5 to Kittle because I do think that they're going to miss time. But at the same time, though, I can't bake on that right now. So that's why I think, for my opinion, the stability of Goedert, the elite offensive line play allows him to play more routes. Basically the narrowness of the target distribution, I absolutely love because it's the 2 wide receivers at Goedert. They don't give a shit about everybody else. But quick thoughts about that before we move on.
I totally agree. I also really like Mark Andrews. The reality is I'd be happy coming out of my draft with Kelce, Andrews, Kittle, Goedert. Any of those guys I'm going to feel pretty happy about. If I miss out on all of those guys, if they go earlier than I expect, then I'm feeling pretty nervous. I feel like those guys are actually pretty good value. Nearly all of them are pretty good value because I think people are overvaluing the tight ends that come later on. And I think we're going to find as we start talking about them, there's a lot of concern about pretty much every tight end we're going to talk about after this.
Yeah, and JB, just to give you a quick update, great to see you as always. Of course, number 1 is Travis Kelce, 2 is Andrews, 3 is Hockenson, 4 is Kittle, and number 5 is Dallas Goedert, which we both agree we both have them in our top 5. Let's jump down to the next tier. Next tier is your high-risk, high-reward guys, and you got Goedert in this tier. I already basically made the case. I would put him up at a tier up. But let's talk about Kyle Pitts. I mean, if you watched last season, Kyle Pitts wasn't even like top 15 on a per-game, top 20. I don't even think on a per-game basis. So in your mind, what's going to change with Desmond Ridder, with Bijan? What's going on? Talk to me. Why do you still have him as a top 6 tight end?
I think we've just seen what he can do. I think they get to the end of the season and they go, we've got this guy that we drafted 4th overall and we're not using him. What are we doing? Like, what's the point in having this guy if we're not going to use him? They're going to recognize that he's one of their elite receivers. They've got Drake London and he started popping off at the end of last year, and that's great. But Kyle Pitts is their other receiver. They're not going to use Mac Hollins that much. They've got to have a second receiver. And I know they love using that running game, but they've got to phase out Cordarrelle Patterson. They can't be using Bijan so much that Pitts is irrelevant. They have to use Pitts in some way. So I think they start phasing him in a little bit more. I don't expect him to get back to the heights of his rookie season. I feel like he's somewhere in the middle, but he has that upside. And so I'm really drafting him for the upside, recognizing that he really could bust. It is a classic boom-bust situation where you could have someone who's close to the tight end 1, but you could have someone that's totally useless again. And for that reason, I like him more than the guys below where they really don't have that same ceiling.
It's just the offense is such a low pass volume offense. And Desmond Ridder, yes, it is a slight upgrade in a pass volume standpoint because Mariota basically ran like a running back last year. It was ridiculous. But the problem I have is, number 1, they brought in Jonnu Smith this year. And it's very, very rare. Very rare. And you can look at the old Titans offenses with Arthur Smith when Jonnu Smith was there. Jonnu was this young, hot tight end, and he was splitting work with Anthony Ferkser. Anthony Ferkser, folks, like 60-40. And like, as much as we want to pretend like they're going to roll out a bunch of 2 tight end sets, which they will, but we always bring this up. Even the most outside of the Ravens over the last few years, most teams run about 60-40 when it comes to, if you just look at isolate minimum, by the way, on average it's 80, but 60-40 is the lowest when it comes to 2 tight end sets versus 3 wide receivers. And Kyle Pitts has not proven to be a blocker yet, and neither has Jonnu. So I don't even know what's going on there, really. But it just gives me – I still have him in my top 10 for what you said, right? He's got the upside. He had 1,000 yards his rookie year. But now with Bijan's there. So running back and tight ends are kind of more of a correlation in their targets than wide receivers. So with Bijan there now too, I can't imagine it. I can't get there. But I'm not fading him at completely, but I'll never get him where I'm drafting him at 9 or like 9 in the throw. So I think I'm definitely out on him. Let's jump down to number 4, studs with target competition. Now we got Darren Waller, Evan Engram, and Pat Freiermuth in this tier. Quickly give us one of the guys that you're really feeling in this tier. Any quick thoughts about this one?
I'm really torn on all of these guys. Darren Waller, I really did not like the landing spot at all. It just didn't feel great to me. There's so much competition in the middle of the field there, but he's also a really good player. And I think we sometimes forget that. A couple of seasons ago, he was an absolute stud. And then he kind of drifted away with that whole Raiders offense going really run heavy and him being injured and having a whole heap of other issues. I feel like he could really spark in the Giants offense. So he definitely has the most upside. We've also got to remember that Engram had the franchise tag used on him. They really see him as a valuable part of this offense. I know Calvin Ridley's there and everyone's really excited about Calvin Ridley, but I could see Engram being a really big part of that offense again. And you're getting the most value with him. He's dropping really low in certain drafts. I'm seeing him go outside the top 12 tight ends in certain drafts. People don't want him for some reason, but we're forgetting that he has more upside than most of the other guys around. Freiermuth's really just in there because he does tend to finish in this range, and he probably will finish in this range again. But Waller and Engram are definitely the guys with the upside. I'll get no Freiermuth at all. I probably won't get a lot of Waller because there are people who are higher than him than me. I reckon Ingram's the one guy I'm going to be targeting if I miss out on those top 5.
I have Darren Waller at number 5. And it's because he has a clearest path to being the number 1 option again. Now, age is different for tight ends, right? He's going to be 30, which means nothing for the tight end landscape. Kelce just dominated at 33, so that's out the window. It's the on and off injuries, but I also feel like last season he was coming off some injuries, but also they didn't want him. Like, it's super weird. Like, Josh McDaniels wanted to clean house. He wanted to bring his own guys in. They let go of Derek Carr. They're trying to trade Hunter Renfrow. They got rid of Darren Waller. Like, that's what I've seen last year. And you saw his snap share went way down last year. He was only playing about 2/3 of the snaps when he was healthy versus like 100% prior to with John Gruden. And I think Dayball, by the way, way back in the day with the Cleveland Browns, Ben Watson, ironically enough, I love that, a little callback they call it in the industry. Ben Watson was his number 1 option in Cleveland one year. So he has produced an offense where he has a number 1 tight end. He's also a former tight ends coach with the Patriots. I absolutely love it. I think he has a shot at 130 plus targets. And I can't say that for sure for guys like Kittle and Kyle Pitts based on their offenses and the competition for them. So let's jump down to tier 5, the best of the rest. Chiggy, baby. By the way, I got to tell you, I have a horrible acknowledgement I have to make. I am lower than ADP on Chig, and I don't know what happened.
What?
I don't know what happened. I don't know. I feel terrible.
Everyone's listening to us, and we did too well. We succeeded in moving it.
I don't know what's happening anymore. I have at 12. You have at 10. ADP has been 11. So touche ADP. I was like, when I saw that, I was just like, shit. Anyway.
Let's get back on the train, man. You're letting us down. We're going to revoke your membership in the Chiggy band.
I actually, for the first time, will admit that I should get revoked. You know what? I have to earn it back. I'll work on it. Anyway, let's jump into the rest. We have 11, David Njoku, 12, Dalton Schultz, 13, Tyler Higbee, and 14, Greg Dulcich. Obviously, we talked about Chig a bunch. Is there one guy in this tier that you either think is going to bump up, or is there maybe a guy in this tier you're worried about might bump down one?
I mean, Tyler Higbee's one that most people wouldn't expect to see in this tier. I think we're forgetting how few options they have at the Rams at the moment. It's really, really dark over there. Cooper Kupp's going to get a lot of targets, obviously. Van Jefferson, I mean, he might get involved, but he wasn't getting targets when Kupp wasn't there, so I don't know why he'd suddenly get a lot of targets when Kupp is there. Higbee's really the only part of that offense that's a bit of a consistent thing for Stafford to hone in on, and we know he does love using his tight ends, Matthew Stafford. So I think Higbee just has that target volume. I think Dulcich is the guy that I think has the upside. He's really talented. I liked him a lot coming out of college. I think he was underused a little bit last year, but he started to develop and come out as the year went on. It's a bit tricky because they've got a heap of wide receivers, but I really like his upside, and he has the possibility to move past a lot of those other guys if things go right for him. I just can't draft him ahead of them. I think there's too much risk there.
So when I did my behind the scenes mad scientist analysis on Higbee, he shot up way high. It's because when you start isolating the points per game last season, when you look at the first games with Matthew Stafford, averaging 7 targets a game, 4 receptions, 39 yards, doesn't sound overly crazy, but he was averaging about 8.5 PPR points per game. But he had 0 touchdowns, which is not going to happen again. You just start sprinkling in a touchdown here and there, and that's going to jump him to probably closer to 10 PPR points per game, which is low tight end 1 numbers. So I have him at 13 with you. So we're both ahead of ADP on Higbee because I do feel like the last year you brought up a good point. It was Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson was there, by the way. So even if you fill in those targets to Van Jefferson, it's probably still going to be 7 targets for Higbee. And there's not a lot of guys that are going to get that much targets with. By the way, I know Stafford is a afterthought, but the dude was a top 10 ADP quarterback last year and a Super Bowl champion and a dominator just 2 years ago. And he's an elite quarterback. Don't think twice. I think this is a solid one, especially as a high end.
And their defense sucks as well. Their defense is really bad. They've absolutely torn it apart. Their linebacking core is hilariously bad. You will not recognize a single name of any player of all their linebackers. It's very bizarre.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's always fun, too, for fantasy football, an underrated aspect there. Let's jump down to Tier 6. This is the last tier we're going to cover on the show. Second-year jumps and bounce backs. Okay, you got Dalton Kincaid, Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, Irv Smith, Juwan Johnson, Sam LaPorta, Michael Mayer, and Logan Thomas. Now, first off, you have 3 rookies in here. And we know the issues with rookie tight ends typically takes long to acclimate. So why do you have so much confidence in these 3 guys?
I mean, they're really good. This is a really loaded tight end class. We knew this coming out of college. Even before the draft, I was really confident this would be a good class. I think all of these guys would be round 1 tight ends in the NFL draft if they weren't all in the same year. I think if this wasn't a year where they all came out at the same time, you would be seeing Michael Mayer go around 20th overall. He was being mocked there at one stage. Before we really started to see how good LaPorta and Kincaid were, you were seeing Michael Mayer get mocked in the top 10 a couple of years ago by some of the best mockers. He is really very talented. LaPorta is very underrated as well. He's going to be he has the upside of being a TJ Hockenson style player for Detroit. The thing that everyone's loving is Kincaid and the possibility he'll be in that big slot role, but that's not guaranteed. You're seeing him go in the top 12 tight ends at times. That's a little too hot for me. We know that rookie tight ends do struggle, but then again, we've also seen the likes of Kyle Pitts and Evan Engram finish in the top 5 in their rookie season. So it can go either way, and I think that upside is what people are drawn towards. I wouldn't get too locked in on that, but I do think it's possible with any of those 3 guys.
I'm not going to do it. You're not going to convince me. Not doing it. I know Kyle Pitts happened, but the uniqueness about Evan Engram and Kyle Pitts was that they emerged as the number 1 option on their teams. A lot of things. Stephon Diggs needs to just leave the team if that's going to happen.
Get injured.
I know he could. And listen, that's what happened with Evan Engram, right? A bunch of injuries happened, and I just think that there's too much competition for targets for the Bills. Sam LaPorta, I might be dynasty wise higher than most people. I actually love Sam LaPorta for dynasty, and I'm kind of all in on him. One of the guys that I do want to just talk about really quick is Irv Smith, because I think a lot of people forget that he was a high draft capital tight end just from a few years ago, a 2nd-round guy. He was also drafted very, very young at 21 years old. So even after his time with Minnesota, he's only 25 years old. And this is when tight ends typically take the next step. Tight ends don't peak at 21 or 22 like receivers do sometimes, like Justin Jefferson. It's a slower burn. Irv Smith is a very talented tight end who took a big-time step just a few years ago before getting seriously hurt. So then he's been out for a few years after getting hurt. And now I think here's an opportunity for him if he just takes over that Hayden Hurst role. He could be looking at 90 to 100 targets in this offense. I expect Joe Burrow and company to light things up. And I think if you completely fade tight ends and you go Chig, then you might be okay taking Irv too there and seeing which one of these young tight ends emerge, because I do think there's a lot there. Last one I want to talk about, special to my heart, And I appreciate that you have him on the list at 22 because his ADP right now is 36 amongst tight ends, is Logan Thomas. And anybody who's been following Razzball over the last few years and knows my content, they know I have a soft spot for Logan since I called his breakout a few years ago. So tell us why you're lighting a candle for Logan Thomas. Tell us.
I mean, look, I really like how this Commanders offense is shaping up for this year. I think there's a lot of talent around the board. Sam Howell's the real question mark, whether he can run the offense. But I think if he can, there's enough targets to go around. Logan Thomas is a really good player. He was what? It was only a couple of years ago. He was a top 12 tight end. He got injured. He moved around. I think if they're playing him as an every down tight end, and I think they probably will, his floor is, tight end 15, tight end 18, something like that. He's out there every time and running enough routes, and he will be, routes, and he will be. The reality is that he is going to be startable most weeks. So he's the kind of guy you can get at the end of drafts if you've really faded tight end, or if you're doing a best ball league, is a great guy to get late on because he's going to give you those weekly points just to give you a floor.
So I'll raise you top 12 and tell you he was fourth in 2020 in points per game in PPR. Breaking news, great job, Jamie. Joe Mixon just restructured his contract and will be back with the Bengals. That's a good call out right there. With Logan Thomas, this is another aspect of this too, is Eric Bieniemy's there. I'm not saying he's Travis Kelce, but at least we know Eric Bieniemy's coming in and he's actually featured a top tight end target in his offense. But the other aspect of this too is I know Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett, we're not sure who it is, but we know Jacoby Brissett loves his tight ends. So if it's Jacoby Brissett, he's been great with tight ends. But Sam Howell, the one thing I will say, Sam Howell does have a underrated, used his legs at 30-plus yards rushing in the one game. But with those quarterbacks, they tend to lean towards their tight ends. We saw Kyler Murray, Zach Ertz, Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, Josh Allen with Dawson Knox a couple years ago. Like, we've seen this a couple times now. And the wide receivers might eat each other alive. Terry McLaurin on the outside with Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel. Don't be surprised if Logan Thomas at the position finishes the highest because of the fact that he might be an every down player in this offense. So I do love that a lot. Let's talk about one more thing before we go. JB comes in with a quick question. I want to just ask you, where do you have Cade Otton right now?
I was so disappointed with what happened with Cade Otton towards the end of last year. He was one of my favorite guys coming out last year in that draft, and he really underperformed. I've got him down towards 28 or 30. He's a guy that I think will rise depending on who wins the the quarterback competition there. I think he's probably going to be an every down tight end, but the reality is that those tight ends usually need a lot of touchdowns to really pay off in fantasy, and this Bucs offense looks awful. Plus, they've got Godwin and Evans, who are touchdown hogs themselves. So the reality is it's really hard to use Otton in anything outside, say, a best ball league where you're hoping to create a bit of a floor for yourself.
When I look at after Logan Thomas, I actually have the late round guys. Is Hayden Hurst, Logan Thomas, Gerald Everett, Tyler Conklin, who I think is underrated with Aaron Rodgers, and Cade Otton's there. And I will say this, there's a lot of turnover with the Bucs. It's not just quarterback. New OC, they have multiple changes on the offensive line. I don't like change. I don't like that much change. That's way too much. I think this offense is going to have its rough patches because not only are they learning a new quarterback, but Dave Canales comes in and they're also learning a new system. However, if I'm in some type of keeper league and or dynasty league, Cade Otton might be able to get on the cheap because Dave Canales comes from Seattle. We have seen them feature tight ends like Jimmy Graham in the past, and there's been success there as well. So I do think that there is something there from a long-term standpoint. But for 2023, no thank you. There's plenty of dart throw late. Logan Thomas is he's tight end 36. You don't need to go deeper, folks. We just gave you the deepest tight end you need to know. All right, that's all we got. That's all we got for the rest of today, folks. But Ben, tell the people where they can find your content. What's next at Razzball and wherever else they can find your content.
Yeah, look, we're doing a heap of stuff at Razzball at the moment. I just talked about why you should be doing your IDP leagues, why you should be adding IDP players to your league. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you heard IDP and you went, what the heck is that? Check out my latest article. I'll be doing more on that next week as well. Secondly, you can obviously hit us up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. Do a whole heap of stuff there and answer all of your DMs. And you can hit me up on Twitter as well at Fantasy First Down with no O. Also, if you're struggling with your league settings and you don't know how to rank players, I have a special ranking tool that I can use on you for a very small fee. So feel free to hit me up for that as well. Happy to help you out with personalized rankings for your league.
Love that. And first of all, Jamie, just one last thing. He keeps coming with the questions about Jelani Woods. I'm just going to take this one really quick. He's a name to watch in training camp, but it just seems like every time I hear about it, it's Mo Alley Cox is still there. Kylan Granson. They keep drafting other tight ends. Seems like they're going to just have this hodgepodge at tight end. But if you start hearing that he's, the guy and he's getting first team reps, he was absolutely dominant on a per route basis last year for a rookie tight end. So he's a name to watch, but right now I'm going to put him in the afterburners. That's all we got today. Make sure, by the way, folks, go ahead. You got anything you want to add for Jelani Woods?
I was going to say, with Jelani Woods, they want to use 2 or 3 tight ends. The reality is in that offense, they're struggling. He's not going to score a lot of touchdowns. Don't waste your time.
All right. That's all we got today, folks. And by the way, make sure you guys go to the Razzball Fantasy site and also check out the Razzball. We got a Razzball, a fantasy best ball contest. So if you haven't signed up, go check it out. Go check out the Razzball article by Steve. You guys will love it. It's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of the top analysts, including the Razzball team, will be in that competition, so go check it out as well. Make sure you also check out our new projections for 2023 with Rudy's projections. So if we find them on my latest Top 150 article. And, of course, make sure you follow us on IG and TikTok at Razzball Fantasy. We're doing a bunch of great content. I want to thank my co-host, once again, Ben Wasley. Go follow him on Twitter at Ben Wasley. Oh, at Fantasy First Down. No, on Twitter. Sorry. And I'm Bobby LaMarco. You follow me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. We are out of here, folks.